Thanks for joining us today. I'm Avni, a policy analyst with the Sustainability in Agriculture team at S&P Global Energy. And I'm joined by my colleague Peter, who is the head of agricultural and food policy at S&P. Today, we want to unpack together what 2026 could look like for agricultural sustainability policy in Europe. So with that, let's jump straight in. So the first question that I want to ask you, Peter, is that we've seen significant farmer protests across the EU recently, alongside developments like the delay to the EUDR and a broader push for regulatory simplification. Against this backdrop, how is EU agricultural sustainability policy likely to evolve in 2026?
Yes, thank you, Avni. I think the biggest change that we've seen in recent years is that the focus of the EU's agri-food policies has shifted a bit away from sustainability and moved more towards ensuring economic protection for farmers. This big shift mainly happened after Russia started its war against Ukraine, which caused major economic disruptions across Europe, and this forced EU policymakers to become a bit more pragmatic than before. And so what this means is that there is currently no longer a big EU sustainability strategy like the European Green Deal and its farm to fork strategy in 2019. And the focus in 2026 is on approving legislations that aim to improve the incomes for farmers and to reduce the legislative requirements for them to make their lives easier. However, this does not mean that sustainability has completely gone away. There have been several EU sustainability laws approved in recent years that continue to have an impact on markets. And as you mentioned, one of them is the EU's anti-deforestation regulation, the EUDR, which will ban agri-food imports that are linked to deforestation. These rules will finally apply now at the end of 2026. So that means that companies need to proactively prepare this year to make sure that they comply with this legislation because it will have very far-going market impacts.
Building on that shift that you've just described, I'd like to turn to the new Common Agricultural Policy, which is currently under discussion. It includes several notable changes, such as a reduced overall budget. What is agricultural sustainability expected to look like under it, and how might these changes shape environmental ambition going forward?
Yeah, so this new focus in the EU on ensuring economic protection for farmers has also been reflected in the EU's Common Agricultural Policy, or the CAP, in the sense that the environmental requirements of the policy have been significantly watered down. And that can be a bit surprising because these environmental conditions were still heavily negotiated in the period 2021-2023. In fact, the cap that is currently in place was postponed for 2 years to give more room for these negotiations, to give more time to work out these environmental components. However, two simplification packages have been approved, one last year and one the year before, that in practice removed nearly all of the basic environmental requirements that European farmers had to respect to be eligible for direct subsidies from the CAP. And for the next CAP that is now being negotiated for the period after 2027, I expect this trend to continue. So there will be a focus on ensuring economic protection for farmers and less on prescriptive environmental requirements for farmers.
Speaking of economics and trade, just in the past week, we've seen the signing of the historic EU-Mercosur agreement. What are the next steps for the deal as it moves through EU's legal and political processes, and what potential roadblocks could emerge during its implementation?
Yeah, so this was quite a major breakthrough. EU member states finally approved the trade agreement with the Mercosur bloc earlier this year after about 25 years of on and off negotiations. And that finally allowed EU leaders and Mercosur leaders to officially sign the agreement. However, the European Parliament, the EU's other co-legislator, still has to approve the deal before it can be fully ratified. And there have been several members within the parliament who have been very opposed to the agreement. And they have even referred it to the European Court of Justice to trying to challenge it. And that could actually further delay the ratification process by up to 2 years. However, the European Commission, so the EU's executive, and EU countries could decide to already go for a provisional application of the deal. And that would mean that the terms of the deal would already enter into force. In terms of its impact for agri-food markets, the biggest change foreseen in this agreement is that it would give more EU market access to relatively cheap agri-food products from the Mercosur countries like beef, sugar, and poultry. However, because the deal has been so controversial in the EU, EU lawmakers have managed to introduce protective clauses in the deal, which means that if the volumes of imports of these products from the Mercosur countries becomes too high, too disruptive for EU markets, the trade benefits can be suspended. So these issues and that we discussed today are also included in my policy team's policy report for 2026, where we look ahead at key agri-food policy developments in the coming year in the EU, in the US, and in the UK. So if you're interested in that, please go have a look and check it out.
Thanks so much for your time and interesting insights, Peter. We'll continue to track these developments closely.
Thanks to you.